Ladies and gentlemen, imagine living in a world where your every move is questioned, your worth is constantly diminished, and your sense of self slowly erodes without you even realizing it. This is the silent reality of countless people who find themselves trapped in the cycle of narcissistic abuse. It doesn't always start with cruelty. It often begins with charm, validation, and promises that feel too good to be true. But over time, the mask slips, and what was once admiration turns into control. What felt like love transforms into manipulation, and what seemed like security becomes fear. The truth is, breaking free from this kind of abuse isn't just about walking away from another person. It's about reclaiming your identity, your voice, and your dignity. It means untangling yourself from the web of gaslighting and guilt, learning to trust your instincts again, and reminding yourself that you are not the problem, no matter how often you were told otherwise. This journey isn't easy. Narcissistic abuse leaves invisible scars, scars on confidence, trust, and sometimes even hope. But here's what I want you to hold on to: freedom is possible, healing is possible, and a life beyond fear and control is not just a dream, it's a reality waiting for brave enough to take that first step. Tonight, we explore how to recognize the patterns, how to dismantle the lies, and most importantly, how to rise stronger, wiser, and freer than you've ever been. Because breaking free isn't just survival, it's the beginning of your true life. Recognizing the patterns of manipulation and control is often the very first step toward breaking free from narcissistic abuse, yet it can also be one of the hardest steps to take. The challenge lies in the subtlety. Manipulation does not always arrive in a loud or aggressive form. In fact, it often begins with behaviors that feel flattering, charming, and validating. It may start with an overwhelming flood of attention, affection, or promises that feel almost magical. This is often called love bombing, where someone showers you with constant praise, texts, gifts, or grand declarations of how special you are. At first, it feels like you have found someone who truly sees you, appreciates you, and values you in ways no one else has. But slowly, beneath the surface of all that attention, a structure of control begins to build. Once the initial stage fades, the manipulative dynamics start revealing themselves. Suddenly, you may notice criticisms creeping in where there used to be compliments. What was once unconditional approval turns into conditional affection, dependent on whether you behave, think, or respond in ways that serve the other person's needs. You may hear things like, "I wouldn't be upset if you didn't act this way," or "You're too sensitive, I was just joking." These statements may sound minor at first, but over time they begin to plant seeds of doubt, making you question your own feelings and judgment. This is not accidental, it is intentional, designed to destabilize you so that control becomes easier to maintain. The patterns of manipulation also emerge in cycles. After a period of criticism or withdrawal, the person may suddenly switch back to kindness or affection, confusing you and making you wonder if you imagined the earlier mistreatment. This is one of the most insidious aspects of control, the push and pull of negativity followed by just enough positivity to keep you holding on. It creates a powerful psychological bond, sometimes referred to as trauma bonding, where your brain clings to the intermittent rewards while enduring the pain. Recognizing this cycle is crucial because it explains why so many people stay trapped in these relationships, blaming themselves for not leaving when in truth, they are caught in a carefully designed pattern of manipulation. Control often extends into the smallest details of your life. It might show up in subtle monitoring of who you spend time with, what you wear, or how you express yourself. At first, it may sound like concern. "I just worry about the kind of people you hang out with," or "I think you look better if you wear this instead." But over time, these remarks become rules, and rules turn into restrictions. Before long, you may find yourself shrinking parts of your identity to avoid conflict, changing your choices to keep the peace, or silencing your opinions so you won't be ridiculed. These compromises may seem small individually, but together, they weave a cage around your sense of autonomy. Gaslighting is another powerful manipulation pattern that often accompanies control. This happens when the abuser twists reality to make you doubt your own memory, perception, or sanity. For example, they might deny saying something you clearly remember, accuse you of overreacting when your reaction is perfectly valid, or claim that you are the one who is causing all the problems. Over time, this erodes your trust in yourself, making you increasingly dependent on their version of reality. Once someone convinces you that you can't trust your own mind, controlling you becomes far easier. There is also the tactic of isolating you from your support system. Manipulators know that people who are connected to friends, family, or communities are harder to control, so they may subtly sow seeds of doubt about the people you love, creating rifts and encouraging distance. "I don't think they really understand you like I do," or "Your friends don't want what's best for you." These statements might feel protective at first, but gradually, they work to cut you off from external perspectives that could help you recognize the abuse. Isolation ensures that the abuser's voice is the loudest and often the only one you hear. Financial and emotional dependency can also be part of the control. Perhaps they discourage you from pursuing career opportunities or make you feel guilty for spending money independently. Maybe they create a dynamic where you constantly need to seek their approval before making even the smallest decision. Each of these tactics reinforces their power while diminishing your ability to feel capable of surviving without them. The key to recognizing these patterns lies in awareness and honesty with yourself. You may notice a pattern of walking on eggshells, adjusting your behavior to avoid unpredictable outbursts, or feeling like you're constantly being judged against a shifting set of expectations. You may feel drained, anxious, or unworthy, even though nothing in your life outside of this relationship suggests you should feel that way. These are signals that manipulation is taking root. What makes recognition so difficult is that these behaviors rarely appear all at once. They accumulate slowly, often masked by moments of affection or excuses that make them easy to overlook. Many survivors describe it as death by 1,000 cuts, where no single incident feels dramatic enough to justify leaving, but the cumulative effect is devastating. That's why being able to name the patterns, love bombing, gaslighting, criticism, conditional affection, control over choices, is such a powerful step. Once you see the repetition, you can no longer dismiss it as coincidence. When you understand the design of manipulation, you begin to see that it is not your weakness that kept you there, but a carefully engineered system built to confuse and control. Recognizing that truth is the foundation upon which all healing rests, because until the pattern is named, it continues to operate in the shadows, disguised as care, love, or protection. Recognition shines the light on what was hidden, and once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. Understanding the power of gaslighting and its effects is essential when speaking about narcissistic abuse, because gaslighting is one of the most destructive and disorienting tools of control. At its core, gaslighting is about making a person doubt their own reality. It is not just about lying or denying, it is about systematically rewriting events, conversations, and experiences in such a way that the victim begins to believe their own memory, perception, or emotions cannot be trusted. This is not a one-time occurrence, it is a gradual erosion of a person's confidence in their own mind. The power lies not only in the denial of truth, but in the way it creates dependency. If you are convinced you cannot trust yourself, you become reliant on the gaslighter to define what is real, what is acceptable, and even what is true about your own identity. Gaslighting often starts with small distortions. For instance, someone might deny making a comment you clearly remember, dismiss your concern as overreaction, or insist that you are misinterpreting something obvious. At first, you may push back, insisting on what you know to be true. But when this pattern repeats over and over, your resistance begins to weaken. You might start questioning whether your memory is as reliable as you thought, whether you are in fact too sensitive, or whether you really are misjudging situations. This constant self-questioning becomes exhausting, and eventually many victims give up the fight, defaulting to the abuser's version of events just to keep the peace or avoid conflict. The insidiousness of gaslighting lies in how personalized it is. A skilled manipulator knows exactly what insecurities or vulnerabilities to target. If you pride yourself on being intelligent, they will find ways to make you feel foolish. If you value being kind, they will accuse you of being selfish or cold. If you rely on your memory and attention to detail, they will undermine it until you second-guess even the simplest recollections. This dismantling of core strengths creates confusion, and confusion is the perfect breeding ground for control. Over time, gaslighting can cause what psychologists refer to as cognitive dissonance, the mental conflict that occurs when a person is forced to hold two opposing realities. On one hand, you know something happened, you felt something, you experienced something. On the other hand, the abuser insists none of it occurred or that you are misremembering. Living in this constant state of contradiction leads to chronic anxiety, self-doubt, and a deep mistrust of one's own intuition. Eventually, many people begin to silence themselves, avoiding raising issues altogether because they anticipate being told they are wrong, crazy, or dramatic. This silence benefits the gaslighter because the less you speak up, the easier it is for them to dominate the narrative. The emotional effects of gaslighting are profound. Victims often describe feeling as though they are losing their mind. They may become anxious about everyday interactions, replaying conversations in their head to check for mistakes. They may begin apologizing excessively, afraid that they are always at fault. Depression is also common, as the repeated invalidation of feelings and perception strips away a sense of self-worth. In some cases, victims withdraw from others because they fear that no one will believe them or that they will be judged for being unstable. Isolation deepens and the abuser's grip tightens, since their reality becomes the only one available. Gaslighting can take many forms beyond outright denial. Sometimes it looks like trivializing your emotions with phrases like, "You're overreacting, you're too sensitive," or "you always make a big deal out of nothing." These statements seem dismissive on the surface, but their repeated use communicates that your feelings are not valid or trustworthy. Another form is shifting blame. If you confront the abuser about harmful behavior, they might twist the conversation until you end up apologizing to them. Over time, you might find yourself accepting blame for things you didn't do, or even for things that were done to you. This reversal of responsibility is a hallmark of gaslighting, and it leaves the victim in a constant state of guilt and confusion. Gaslighting also thrives on rewriting history. An argument that left you in tears may later be described as just a little disagreement, or even as your fault for provoking it. Events are reframed to make the abuser look reasonable and you look irrational. When you try to hold on to your version of reality, you are told that you are remembering incorrectly or that your emotions are distorting the facts. Over time, you begin to wonder whether your memories are accurate at all. This erosion of memory is particularly dangerous because it makes it easier for the abuser to create new versions of events in the future without resistance. The long-term effects of gaslighting can extend far beyond the relationship itself. Even after leaving an abusive situation, survivors may struggle with trusting themselves. They may doubt their decisions, second-guess their perceptions, and feel insecure about expressing emotions. In many cases, the voice of the gaslighter lingers in their minds, echoing the accusations and dismissals long after the person is gone. This is why recovery from gaslighting often requires deliberate effort to rebuild self-trust and reconnect with one's own inner voice. The power of gaslighting also lies in how invisible it can appear to outsiders. Because it often happens behind closed doors and because it doesn't leave physical evidence, others may not understand why the victim seems so confused, anxious, or hesitant. In some cases, the gaslighter presents themselves as charming and rational to the outside world, making it even harder for the victim to be believed. This isolation deepens the psychological prison, convincing the victim that no one will understand or support them if they try to speak out. Recognizing the signs of gaslighting is critical to disarming its power. The repeated denial of your reality is not a sign that you are broken or flawed. It is a deliberate tactic designed to destabilize you. The fact that you feel confused, unsure, or guilty is evidence of the manipulation at work, not a reflection of your actual worth or abilities. The more clearly you see the patterns, the more you can begin to separate your true self from the false reality being imposed on you. Separating your identity from the abuser's narrative is one of the most difficult yet most liberating parts of healing from narcissistic abuse. Narcissistic individuals often construct an alternate version of reality where they are the hero, the victim, or the authority, and in that narrative, you are cast into a role that keeps you small, dependent, and silenced. This narrative may tell you that you are not good enough, not smart enough, too emotional, too difficult, too needy, or that you are simply unworthy of love unless it comes from them. Over time, this narrative becomes so entangled with your sense of self that you may start to confuse who you truly are with who they tell you that you are. The first step in reclaiming your identity is recognizing that their story about you is not the truth. It is simply a tool designed to keep you under their control. In the early stages of a relationship, the narcissistic person may praise certain aspects of you, highlighting your kindness, your intelligence, your looks, or your talents. This often feels validating and uplifting, but soon it becomes a double-edged sword. Those very qualities that were once celebrated may be twisted into flaws when they threaten the abuser's sense of superiority or control. If you are kind, they may call you naive. If you are intelligent, they may tell you that you think too much or that you are arrogant. If you are confident, they may frame you as selfish. These contradictions are deliberate. They create confusion and keep you chasing approval. Slowly, you may stop trusting your own assessment of yourself and instead start relying on theirs because you are desperate to get back to the version of yourself they once claimed to admire. The longer this continues, the more the abuser's narrative becomes internalized. You may hear their criticisms echoing in your mind long after they are spoken. You may find yourself hesitating to make choices because you imagine how they would judge you. You may even abandon hobbies, friendships, or ambitions because their voice has convinced you that you are not capable or that those things are meaningless. This is how the erosion of identity happens, not all at once, but piece by piece, until the person you once were feels like a distant memory. Another way abusers shape identity is through projection. They may accuse you of the very behaviors they themselves are guilty of, such as being selfish, dishonest, or manipulative. Because these accusations are made with intensity and conviction, you may begin to question whether they are right. You may start defending yourself constantly, trying to prove your innocence, but in doing so, you are still allowing their narrative to define the conversation. Instead of living as your authentic self, you become trapped in a reactive state, defined by what they say you are rather than who you truly know yourself to be. Separating your identity from this imposed story requires awareness of the manipulation. It begins with noticing the recurring themes of their narrative, the labels they give you, the criticisms that never seem to change, the way they distort your intentions. When you can name these patterns, you can begin to see them not as reflections of your truth, but as strategies of control. For example, if they constantly call you too sensitive, it may not be because you are overly emotional, but because your ability to notice mistreatment threatens their ability to get away with it. If they tell you that you are nothing without them, it is not evidence of your inadequacy, but proof of their fear of losing power over you. Recognizing the purpose behind their words helps to separate your self-image from their agenda. Rebuilding your identity also means reconnecting with your authentic self, the self that existed before the abuse and the self that still lives within you even if it feels buried. This might involve revisiting memories of who you were before the relationship, remembering the passions, strengths, and values that defined you. It may mean reflecting on times when you felt proud, capable, or joyful, even if those moments feel distant now. The goal is to remind yourself that you are not the sum of their judgments, but a whole person with your own history, your own strengths, and your own truth. Another important step is paying attention to your inner voice. Abuse trains you to prioritize the abuser's perspective over your own, but relearning to listen to yourself is critical. This can start with small decisions, choosing what you want to eat, what music you want to listen to, what clothes you feel comfortable in, without second guessing whether it would be approved of. These small acts of autonomy are not insignificant. They are daily reminders that your preferences and choices are valid. Over time, these small steps build confidence in trusting yourself again. Self-reflection can also help expose the distortions of the abuser's narrative. Writing down the criticisms you have internalized and then questioning their truth can be powerful. For example, if you have been told repeatedly that you are lazy, reflect on times you worked hard, persevered, or showed dedication. If you were labeled as selfish, recall moments when you gave generously your time, energy, or care. By gathering evidence from your own life, you can begin to dismantle the false image imposed on you and replace it with a more accurate and compassionate understanding of yourself. Support from others can play a vital role in this process. Trusted friends, family members, or professionals can help mirror back your true qualities, offering perspectives that counteract the distorted narrative you have been fed. Sometimes simply hearing someone say, "That's not who you are, that's what you were told you are," can be enough to spark recognition. Their validation does not define you, but it can help bridge the gap until you are strong enough to fully validate yourself again. The most powerful aspect of separating your identity from the abuser's narrative is realizing that their version of you was never about you at all. It was always about maintaining control, feeding their ego, and deflecting from their own flaws. The cruelty of their words does not define your reality, even if it has shaped your experience. Their narrative is a story created for their benefit, not your truth. Once you can see that distinction clearly, the process of reclaiming yourself begins piece by piece, moment by moment, until your own voice grows louder than theirs. Setting and enforcing firm personal boundaries is one of the most important acts of self-preservation in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse. Boundaries are not about building walls to shut people out. They are about defining where you end and another person begins. In a healthy relationship, boundaries are respected, negotiated, and honored. In a toxic or narcissistic dynamic, boundaries are tested, pushed, and broken down deliberately because the goal of the abuser is to blur the lines of your autonomy until you are no longer sure you have the right to say no. Relearning that you do have this right and that your needs and limits are valid is both a psychological and emotional reclaiming of power. Narcissistic individuals thrive on control, and one of their most effective methods of gaining control is to slowly erode your boundaries. This can begin in ways that seem harmless, even flattering. They may pressure you to share personal details too quickly, convincing you that openness means trust. They may demand your time and attention constantly, making it seem as though their need for closeness is proof of love. But as time goes on, the invasions escalate. Reading your messages without permission, demanding explanations for where you go, disregarding your preferences, or ignoring your expressed discomfort. Each time you allow these behaviors, often out of fear, confusion, or a desire to keep the peace, the message to the abuser is clear. They can take more. Boundaries are not just ignored, they are intentionally dismantled. The impact of this boundary erosion is profound. Without boundaries, you begin to feel as though you no longer have ownership of your time, your emotions, or even your thoughts. You may notice that decisions you once made freely now require their approval. You may feel guilty for wanting space, guilty for needing rest, guilty for saying no. This guilt is not accidental. It is instilled to keep you compliant. When you internalize the belief that your boundaries are selfish, you begin to abandon them altogether, allowing the other person to dominate your life. Learning to set boundaries after such an experience can feel foreign, even frightening, because the very act of asserting yourself may trigger memories of conflict or punishment. But boundaries are essential because they communicate your value to yourself. They are not about changing the behavior of the other person. They are about affirming what you will and will not allow in your own life. For example, if someone speaks to you disrespectfully, you may not be able to stop them from using hurtful words, but you can enforce a boundary by walking away, ending the conversation, or limiting your contact. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about protecting yourself. One of the challenges in setting boundaries after narcissistic abuse is learning to silence the internalized voice of the abuser. That voice may tell you that you are overreacting, that your needs are unimportant, that saying no makes you difficult or unlovable. This is where boundaries become more than external rules, they become acts of healing. Each time you assert a limit, You are teaching yourself that your needs matter and that your comfort, safety, and peace are worth defending. This process is not just about managing relationships with others, it is about rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Boundaries must be specific and clear, not vague or open to interpretation. Instead of saying, "I don't like when you do that," a firm boundary sounds like, "If you continue to do that, I will leave the conversation." The power lies not in hoping the other person changes, but in stating what action you will take to protect yourself if the boundary is crossed. This clarity removes the ambiguity that manipulators thrive on. Narcissistic individuals often exploit vagueness, twisting your words, finding loopholes, or pretending not to understand. Specific boundaries deny them that opportunity. Enforcing boundaries is often more difficult than setting them, especially when dealing with someone who is determined to ignore them. The first time you enforce a boundary, you may face pushback, anger, or attempts to guilt you into compliance. This resistance does not mean your boundary is wrong, it means it is working. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will be the most upset when you establish them. Expect this, prepare for it, and remind yourself that their discomfort is not your responsibility. Boundaries are about your growth, not their approval. Boundaries are also not just external but internal. Internal boundaries involve the limits you set within yourself, such as refusing to absorb false guilt, rejecting negative labels, and choosing not to engage in self-blame when manipulation occurs. For instance, if someone accuses you of being selfish for prioritizing rest, your internal boundary allows you to reject that accusation and reaffirm the truth that self-care is not selfishness. These internal boundaries are vital because they create a shield against the lingering effects of gaslighting and manipulation. One of the most empowering aspects of boundaries is how they help redefine your sense of control. In the context of abuse, control was taken from you. Your choices were dictated, your feelings dismissed, your individuality diminished. Boundaries return control to where it belongs, within you. They give you the power to decide who has access to your time, your energy, and your emotions. They restore the right to say no without apology, to walk away without guilt, and to protect your peace without explanation. Boundaries also create a natural filter in relationships. When you begin to practice them consistently, healthy people will respect them and adapt accordingly, while toxic individuals will reveal themselves through their resistance. This makes boundaries not just a tool for protection, but also a tool for clarity. They help you see who is capable of meeting you in a space of mutual respect and who is only interested in what they can take from you. Reinforcing boundaries requires consistency. If you state a boundary but fail to enforce it, the message becomes unclear, and manipulative people will seize the opportunity to test it again. Consistency is not about being harsh, but about being firm. It is about showing yourself that your word has power and that you are committed to honoring your own limits. Each time you uphold a boundary, you strengthen your sense of self and weaken the hold of the old patterns that once kept you trapped. Breaking the cycle of guilt and self-blame is one of the greatest challenges faced by those who have endured narcissistic abuse. This cycle forms because the abuser repeatedly conditions you to believe that everything is your fault, every argument, every disappointment, every moment of tension. Over time, this conditioning becomes internalized, and even in the absence of the abuser, you may find yourself automatically assuming blame when things go wrong. This is not just a habit of thought. It is the result of deliberate psychological manipulation designed to keep you disempowered. Narcissistic individuals excel at shifting responsibility. If they lash out in anger, they will insist you provoke them. If they break a promise, they will argue that your expectations were unrealistic. If they betray your trust, they will accuse you of driving them to it. In each scenario, they rewrite the story so that you are the cause of their harmful actions. When this pattern repeats enough times, you begin to anticipate it. Before they even blame you, you might start apologizing, hoping to diffuse the situation. Apologies become survival tactics, and soon guilt becomes a default state of being. This guilt is not limited to specific incidents. It seeps into your identity, convincing you that there is something inherently wrong with you. You might believe you are not lovable enough, not patient enough, not good enough. These beliefs are powerful because they keep you stuck, always striving to fix yourself rather than questioning the abuser's behavior. Instead of seeing the truth that you were manipulated into accepting false responsibility, you may feel as though you are the problem that needs to be solved. Self-blame also arises from the confusion of gaslighting. When someone constantly denies your reality, you begin to doubt yourself. If you cannot trust your memory or perception, it becomes easier to accept the narrative that you are to blame. You may think, maybe I did misunderstand, or maybe I am too sensitive. These thoughts are not reflections of reality. They are symptoms of sustained psychological conditioning, yet they feel real, and the guilt they produce can be overwhelming. Another reason guilt and self-blame take root is the deep desire for the relationship to work. When you invest time, energy, and love into someone, you want to believe that the difficulties can be fixed. If the other person refuses to take responsibility, the only alternative is to take it upon yourself. It feels easier to believe, if I just try harder, things will get better. than to face the painful truth that no amount of effort will change a person committed to manipulation and control. Hope keeps you in the cycle, and guilt fuels the effort to keep trying. Breaking this cycle requires first recognizing where the guilt comes from. Ask yourself whether the guilt you feel is proportionate to the situation or whether it has been magnified by years of conditioning. For example, forgetting to return a message or needing time alone are normal human behaviors, not evidence of selfishness or neglect. Yet after abuse, even small actions like these may trigger intense guilt because they were framed as unacceptable in the relationship. Learning to distinguish between genuine accountability and false guilt is a crucial step in the process. Self-compassion plays an equally important role. Guilt and self-blame thrive in environments of harsh self-criticism. You may have internalized the abuser's voice so deeply that it has become your own inner critic. This voice tells you that you are always at fault, always falling short, always deserving of blame. To break free, you must learn to speak to yourself differently. Self-compassion does not mean denying responsibility for real mistakes. It means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a loved one. It means acknowledging your humanity, your limitations, and your right to be imperfect without being condemned. Another step is reframing responsibility. In a healthy relationship, responsibility is shared. Both people make mistakes, both people contribute to conflict, and both people take steps to repair. In an abusive relationship, responsibility is weaponized, pushed entirely onto you while the abuser absolves themselves. Understanding this imbalance allows you to see that the burden you carried was never yours to begin with. You were not responsible for their anger, their cruelty, or their dishonesty. You were only responsible for your own actions, and those actions were often shaped by the impossible environment you were forced to survive in. It is also important to recognize how guilt can linger even after the relationship ends. You may feel guilty for leaving, guilty for staying as long as you did, guilty for not seeing the red flags sooner, guilty for the impact it had on your family or friends. These layers of guilt can feel endless, but they all stem from the same distorted belief that you should have done more, been more, or known more. The reality is that you did the best you could with the knowledge and resources you had at the time. Blaming yourself for not escaping sooner is unfair because the very tactics of abuse were designed to keep you trapped. One way to challenge guilt and self-blame is to examine the standards you hold for yourself versus the standards you hold for others. Often, survivors of abuse expect perfection from themselves while excusing terrible behavior from their abuser. If you would never hold a friend accountable for the things you condemn yourself for, then the guilt is not about truth. It is about conditioning. By shifting your perspective, you can begin to dismantle the double standard that keeps you weighed down. Another practical step is to replace self-blame with self-inquiry. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" ask, "Why am I blaming myself for someone else's behavior?" Instead of asking, "How could I let this happen?" ask, "What can I learn about the tactics that kept me trapped?" This shift moves you from shame into awareness, from self-punishment into growth. Awareness breaks cycles, because once you understand the mechanisms of manipulation, you can see how the guilt was planted and cultivated rather than believing it reflects your worth. Rebuilding self-trust and confidence after narcissistic abuse is a slow and deliberate process because the very core of what abuse attacks is your belief in yourself. A narcissistic person thrives on making you question your instincts, your decisions, your worth, and even your perception of reality. Over time, this erodes not only your confidence, but also your ability to trust the one voice you should always be able to rely on, your own. To rebuild these foundations is to reclaim the power that was taken from you and to restore the relationship you have with yourself. The erosion of self-trust usually begins subtly. It starts with moments of second-guessing after repeated gaslighting. You might feel certain about something you saw or heard, but when the abuser insists otherwise, you begin to wonder if your memory is faulty. At first, you may defend yourself, but after enough cycles of being told you are wrong, you learn to silence your doubts by surrendering to theirs. This process chips away at your internal compass until you begin to rely more on their perspective than your own. By the time the relationship deepens, you may no longer feel capable of making choices without their input. That dependency is the result of deliberate manipulation, not personal weakness. Confidence, too, is systematically dismantled. In the beginning, you may have felt strong, capable, and secure. Perhaps you had achievements, ambitions, or qualities you were proud of. Slowly those were targeted. If you expressed excitement about a success, it might be downplayed or mocked. If you pursued goals, they might be discouraged or sabotaged. If you showed independence, it might be framed as selfishness. The abuser knows that someone who feels confident and self-assured is harder to control, so they ensure your confidence is steadily undermined. Eventually, you may stop celebrating yourself altogether, internalizing the belief that nothing you do is good enough. The journey of rebuilding begins with awareness of how this trust and confidence were dismantled. Understanding that these were not natural losses but forced outcomes of abuse is the first step in reclaiming them. You were not born doubting yourself, you were trained to. Recognizing this shifts the focus away from self-blame and toward the reality of manipulation. From there, you can begin to challenge the false beliefs you absorbed. Rebuilding self-trust often starts with small, practical steps. You may not feel ready to make big life decisions, but you can start with everyday choices. Choose what meal you want without asking anyone else for validation. Decide what music to listen to, what clothes to wear, or what book to read, and notice how it feels to honor your own preferences. These small acts of autonomy may seem insignificant, but they send powerful messages to your subconscious that your choices are valid, that your desires matter, and that you can depend on yourself again. Over time, these small affirmations accumulate, strengthening the inner voice that was silenced. Confidence can be rebuilt by reconnecting with your strengths and achievements. Abuse conditions you to focus only on your flaws, but the truth is that you have qualities, skills, and experiences that are evidence of resilience. Reflecting on past accomplishments, no matter how small, helps restore perspective. Perhaps you completed an education, pursued a career, nurtured friendships, or navigated challenges with courage. Each of these moments is proof of your capability. Writing them down, revisiting them, and even celebrating them again can reignite the confidence that abuse tried to bury. Another powerful step is to rebuild trust in your instincts. During abuse, intuition often alerts you to red flags, but because those instincts were dismissed or mocked, you learn to ignore them. Relearning to listen begins with paying attention to your body and emotions. Notice how you feel around certain people, in certain situations, or when making certain choices. If your stomach knots, if your chest tightens, or if you feel drained, these are signals worth honoring. The more you practice listening to your inner cues, the more you strengthen the trust between yourself and your intuition. Self-trust also grows when you keep commitments to yourself. During abuse, promises to yourself were often broken because survival required prioritizing the abuser's needs. Rebuilding involves creating new commitments and following through. These do not have to be grand. They might be as simple as promising to take a walk 3 times a week, to set aside time for rest, or to journal regularly. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the message that you can rely on yourself. The consistency of these small promises builds a foundation of trust that expands into larger areas of your life. Confidence also depends on how you speak to yourself. The abuser's voice may linger in your mind, repeating criticisms long after they are gone. Challenging that voice requires conscious effort. Replace the language of failure with language of growth. Instead of telling yourself, "I always mess up," try, "I am learning." Instead of, "I'm not good enough," say, "I am growing into the best version of myself." These affirmations may feel unnatural at first, but with repetition, they begin to reshape your inner dialogue. Just as negative conditioning weakened your confidence, positive reinforcement can strengthen it again. Surrounding yourself with supportive people also plays a critical role. Abuse thrives in isolation, but healing thrives in community. Trusted friends, mentors, or therapists can reflect back your strengths when you struggle to see them yourself. They can validate your feelings, remind you of your progress, and help you hold on to the truth when self-doubt creeps in. Hearing affirmations from safe people is not about replacing your own voice, but about reinforcing it until it grows strong enough to stand alone again. Part of rebuilding confidence also involves giving yourself permission to fail. Perfectionism is often a byproduct of abuse because you learned that mistakes led to criticism or punishment. To reclaim confidence, you must accept that mistakes are part of growth, not proof of inadequacy. Every decision you make, whether successful or not, is evidence of your willingness to trust yourself again. Failure is not the opposite of confidence, it is part of building it. The process of rebuilding self-trust and confidence is rarely linear. There will be days when you feel strong and others when self-doubt creeps back in. What matters is persistence. Every small step you take away from the narrative of the abuser and toward your own truth strengthens the foundation of who you are. Each choice, each affirmation, each act of self-respect is a stone placed back into the structure of your identity, forming a new version of confidence rooted not in external approval but in internal strength. Seeking support from safe and validating people is one of the most important steps in healing after narcissistic abuse, because abuse thrives in isolation. When you are trapped in a cycle of manipulation, you are often cut off from voices that could remind you of your worth and offer perspective on the situation. Narcissistic individuals deliberately foster this isolation, whether by criticizing your friends, discouraging family connections, or making you feel guilty for prioritizing other relationships. The goal is to ensure their voice is the loudest, and over time it may become the only one you hear. Breaking this silence and surrounding yourself with supportive, trustworthy people helps restore balance, rebuild self-worth, and dismantle the lies you were conditioned to believe. Safe and validating people are those who listen without judgment, who respect your boundaries, and who encourage your healing rather than questioning it. They are not interested in controlling you or dictating your choices. Instead, they provide empathy, affirmation, and encouragement. After abuse, finding these people may feel daunting, especially if your trust in others has been shaken. You may fear being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. You may also feel hesitant to open up because you were taught that your emotions are exaggerated or invalid. Yet healing requires learning that there are people who can hold space for your truth without twisting it or diminishing it. Validation is a critical piece of this process. During abuse, your feelings and experiences were constantly invalidated. You were told you were overreacting, imagining things, or being too sensitive. Safe people do the opposite. They affirm that what you went through was real, that your emotions are valid, and that your responses make sense given the circumstances. This validation is not about fueling resentment, but about grounding you in reality. When someone says, "I believe you," or "that wasn't your fault," it begins to undo years of psychological conditioning. You start to realize that the distorted narrative you were fed was never the truth. Support can come from different sources. Friends and family who genuinely care about you can provide emotional grounding, reminding you of who you are beyond the relationship. Professional support, such as therapists or counselors trained in trauma and abuse recovery, can offer guidance and strategies tailored to your healing process. Support groups, whether in person or online, can connect you with others who have gone through similar experiences. These spaces are particularly powerful because they show you that you are not alone, that the patterns of abuse you endured are recognizable, and that others have survived and healed. One of the challenges in seeking support is overcoming the shame that often lingers after abuse. You may feel embarrassed for staying in the relationship as long as you did or for not recognizing the red flags sooner. This shame can silence you, making you believe no one will understand. But safe people help dismantle this shame by normalizing your experience. They remind you that manipulation is designed to keep people trapped, and that enduring abuse is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to your resilience. Every time someone listens without judgment, the weight of shame begins to lift. It is also important to learn how to distinguish between supportive and unsupportive responses. Not everyone will be able to understand or provide the kind of care you need. Some people may minimize your experience, urge you to just get over it, or pressure you to reconcile with the abuser. These responses can be traumatizing, reinforcing feelings of doubt and invalidation. Part of healing involves discerning who is truly safe to share with and who is not. Safe people do not rush your process, dismiss your pain, or demand explanations. They respect your pace and acknowledge the reality of your journey. Building a supportive network may require intentional effort. If your social circle has been damaged by isolation, you may need to reconnect with old friends or seek out new communities. This can feel intimidating at first, but even small steps matter. Attending a support group, reaching out to a trusted acquaintance, or joining communities centered around shared interests can create new opportunities for connection. The goal is not to surround yourself with many people, but with the right people, those who bring safety, empathy, and encouragement into your life. Support also provides accountability for your healing. When you are rebuilding after abuse, it is easy to slip back into patterns of self-doubt or even to feel tempted to return to the toxic relationship. Having people who remind you of your progress, who encourage you to keep moving forward, and who hold space for your setbacks can make the difference between feeling stuck and continuing to grow. These people act as anchors, helping you stay grounded when the pull of old habits feels strong. Another benefit of safe support is that it helps rebuild trust in others. Abuse often leaves you wary, suspicious, or fearful of connection. You may believe that everyone will hurt or betray you because that is what you were taught to expect. But experiencing relationships that are respectful and validating provides evidence that not all connections are harmful. Over time, these positive experiences help reshape your worldview, showing you that healthy relationships are possible and that you deserve them. It is equally important to remember that seeking support is not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of strength. Abuse conditions you to believe that you must handle everything alone, that asking for help makes you needy or incapable. In reality, reaching out is an act of courage. It acknowledges that healing is not meant to be done in isolation, and that human connection is part of what makes recovery possible. Each time you allow yourself to be supported, you challenge the false belief that you are unworthy of care. The journey of healing is deeply personal, but it is not one you have to walk alone. Surrounding yourself with safe and validating people provides the emotional scaffolding needed to rebuild your sense of self. Their presence does not erase the pain, but it offers comfort, perspective, and affirmation. It gives you a mirror to see yourself clearly again, not through the distorted lens of the abuser, but through the eyes of those who recognize your strength and humanity. Learning the importance of emotional detachment in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse is one of the most vital skills for healing and reclaiming your life. Narcissistic abuse thrives on emotional entanglement. The abuser feeds on your reactions, whether they are fueled by love, anger, fear, or desperation. Every time you explain yourself, argue back, or try to make them see your point of view, you are offering emotional energy that sustains the cycle of control. Detachment does not mean you stop feeling altogether, nor does it mean you lack empathy. Rather, it means you learn to redirect your emotions in a way that protects you instead of being consumed by the chaos the narcissist creates. When you are caught in a narcissistic dynamic, you are constantly pulled into an emotional tug of war. The abuser may shower you with attention and affection one moment, then withdraw, criticize, or demean you the next. These highs and lows condition you to stay hooked, always hoping that the next high will erase the pain of the low. This cycle trains your brain to seek validation from the very person who is causing harm, which makes emotional detachment feel almost impossible at first. But without learning this skill, the abuser continues to dictate how you feel and behave. Detachment is the process of cutting the invisible strings they use to control your emotions. Emotional detachment begins with understanding that your feelings are real, but they do not have to control your actions. The abuser thrives on provoking reactions, so the more you learn to pause before responding, the less power they have. For example, if they insult you, the instinct might be to defend yourself or prove them wrong. But when you detach, you recognize that engaging in that argument only drains your energy. Instead of defending, you learn to disengage, knowing their words are not a reflection of your truth, but a projection of their own dysfunction. Another key aspect of detachment is letting go of the need for the abuser's validation. Narcissists often create dependency by making you crave their approval. They may dangle affection like a reward, withholding it when you do not comply. Over time, this conditions you to chase after their acknowledgement, even if it means sacrificing your own boundaries. Detachment involves stepping away from this dynamic and realizing that their approval has no true value. It is not a measure of your worth, but a tool of manipulation. By refusing to chase it, you begin to break free from the trap. One of the biggest barriers to emotional detachment is guilt. Many survivors feel guilty for pulling away, for not responding, or for prioritizing themselves. This guilt is deeply ingrained, often cultivated by the abuser who convinced you that you are selfish or uncaring if you do not meet their needs. But guilt is one of the strongest chains keeping you bound. Detachment requires reframing this guilt as a sign of conditioning rather than evidence of wrongdoing. Choosing to detach is not cruelty, it is self-preservation. It is about choosing peace over chaos and clarity over confusion. Practical strategies can support the process of detachment. One of these is the gray rock technique, which involves becoming as uninteresting and emotionally unavailable as possible when dealing with the abuser. Instead of reacting with anger, sadness, or excitement, you respond in neutral, minimal ways. Over time, this starves the narcissist of the emotional energy they crave. Another strategy is limiting or cutting off contact altogether when possible, which provides space for your emotions to stabilize without constant disruption. If complete no contact is not an option due to shared responsibilities, low contact boundaries can still reduce the emotional drain. Detachment also involves shifting your focus from the abuser to yourself. Abuse conditions you to constantly think about them, what they want, how they feel, how to avoid setting them off. Detachment redirects that focus inward. It asks questions like, what do I need right now? How do I feel about this? What choices serve my well-being? This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to centering your life around their demands, but with practice, it becomes an empowering act of reclaiming your identity. It is important to remember that detachment is not the same as indifference. You may still feel anger, sadness, or even longing, and that is normal. Detachment does not erase emotions, it changes the way you relate to them. Instead of allowing feelings to dictate your actions, you learn to observe them, process them, and decide how to respond in ways that honor your healing. This skill requires patience and practice, but over time, it helps you regain control over your inner world. Another layer of detachment involves dismantling the fantasy of who you thought the abuser could be. Many survivors hold on to the hope that if they try harder or love more, the narcissist will change and become the person they showed glimpses of in the beginning. This hope keeps you emotionally tied because you are not only attached to the person, but also to the dream of what the relationship could be. Detachment requires acknowledging that this dream is a manipulation tool, a mirage used to keep you invested. Accepting reality, painful as it may be, allows you to release the illusion and stop giving your heart to someone who consistently harms it. In addition, practicing detachment helps you regain a sense of emotional safety. Abuse keeps you in a state of hypervigilance, always on edge, waiting for the next insult or manipulation. This constant emotional arousal exhausts you and makes it difficult to think clearly. Detachment gives you the ability to step back and recognize that their chaos does not have to dictate your inner state. You may not control their actions, but you can control how much access they have to your emotions. This boundary creates the space needed for healing and clarity. Emotional detachment is about reclaiming sovereignty over your inner life. It allows you to stop being a puppet to someone else's moods, manipulations, and games. It gives you the power to respond rather than react, to choose peace over turmoil, and to prioritize your well-being over their demands. Each act of detachment, no matter how small, reinforces the message that your emotions belong to you and you alone. Embracing healing as a gradual, ongoing process is one of the most difficult yet most transformative truths to accept after enduring narcissistic abuse. Many survivors, exhausted from years of manipulation and pain, want healing to happen quickly, as if walking away should immediately erase the scars left behind. The reality is that recovery does not follow a straight line. It is not about waking up one day suddenly free of the wounds and confusion, but about learning step by step to live differently, to rebuild trust in yourself, and to integrate your past without letting it define your future. The pace of healing is often slow because abuse dismantles so many layers of your sense of self. Your confidence, your boundaries, your ability to trust your own judgment, all of these are chipped away over time by gaslighting, criticism, and control. Expecting yourself to instantly repair what took years to erode sets you up for frustration. Instead, healing requires patience with yourself and a willingness to see progress in small, almost invisible ways, not reacting to a trigger as intensely as before, setting a small boundary without apologizing, or recognizing manipulative behavior faster than you once did. These are all victories that mark your growth, even if they do not feel monumental at the moment. Part of embracing healing as an ongoing process involves redefining what healing actually means. It is not about forgetting the abuse or pretending it never happened. It is about learning how to carry the experience without being crushed by it. You may still feel sadness, anger, or even grief years later, but those emotions do not mean you are failing. They mean you are human. Healing is not the absence of pain, but the ability to coexist with it without letting it control your life. This reframing can release the pressure to move on in ways that others might expect, and instead allow you to honor your journey at your own pace. A significant element of the healing process is grief. Surviving narcissistic abuse involves mourning not just the relationship, but also the version of yourself you lost during it. You may grieve the time you invested, the trust you gave, or the dreams you held on to. This grief can be complex because you are not only grieving what was, but also what you hope could have been. Giving yourself permission to feel this grief without rushing it is an act of compassion toward yourself. Healing means making space for sorrow without being consumed by it, allowing it to ebb and flow while trusting that it will lessen in intensity over time. Another reason healing must be gradual is because it involves reprogramming patterns that were deeply ingrained. Narcissistic abuse often conditions you to doubt yourself, to silence your needs, and to prioritize the abuser's emotions over your own. Undoing these habits is not something that happens overnight. It takes repetition, practice, and forgiveness for the times you slip back into old behaviors. Each time you notice yourself people-pleasing or questioning your worth, you are given another opportunity to practice new responses. The act of catching yourself, even if you do not always act differently right away, is itself progress. Support plays a vital role in this ongoing process. Having safe people who remind you that healing is not linear can ease the pressure you put on yourself. When you stumble or feel like you are moving backward, those voices can remind you of how far you have come and that setbacks are part of the journey. Therapists, support groups, and close friends can serve as anchors, helping you see the bigger picture when you are too close to the pain to recognize it yourself. Healing in isolation can feel overwhelming, but healing in community offers reassurance that you are not walking this road alone. The process also requires cultivating self-compassion. After abuse, many survivors are harsh with themselves, criticizing their own slowness or feeling weak for still struggling. But this internal harshness echoes the voice of the abuser, who conditioned you to believe you were never enough. Replacing that voice with one of kindness is essential. This means speaking to yourself as you would to a friend, acknowledging your courage, and reminding yourself that healing is not a race. Self-compassion allows you to make space for your humanity rather than demanding perfection from yourself in recovery. Healing as an ongoing process also involves creating new experiences that counteract the damage of the past. When you explore hobbies, build friendships, or pursue goals that bring joy, you are actively rewriting your story. These new experiences show your nervous system that life can be safe, fulfilling, and free of manipulation. They create reference points that gradually outweigh the memories of abuse. The more you engage in life in ways that affirm your worth, the stronger your sense of self becomes and the more distance you place between yourself and the trauma. It is also important to understand that triggers and setbacks will surface sometimes unexpectedly, even long after leaving the abusive relationship. A word, a tone, or a situation may bring back memories and emotional reactions you thought were behind you. Rather than seeing these moments as failures, they can be seen as opportunities to apply the coping tools you have developed. Each trigger becomes a reminder of how much you are capable of handling, and every time you soothe yourself instead of spiraling, you strengthen your resilience. The ongoing nature of healing also means that there may not be a single moment where you declare yourself healed. Instead, healing unfolds quietly in the background, woven into the fabric of your daily choices. It is in the boundaries you set, the self-care you prioritize, and the clarity you develop about what you will and will not tolerate. Over time, these small acts accumulate, creating a life that feels freer, safer, and more authentic than before. Healing is not about reaching a finish line, but about creating a sustainable way of living that supports your well-being. Embracing this process requires shifting from impatience to trust. Trust that the work you are doing, even when it feels slow or invisible, is making a difference. Trust that you are capable of navigating the ups and downs without giving up. Trust that healing does not demand perfection but persistence. Each day you choose to show up for yourself, whether through self-care therapy or simply acknowledging your feelings, you are moving forward in ways that matter deeply, even if the progress is not always visible. Reclaiming freedom and creating a future rooted in self-worth is the ultimate step after surviving narcissistic abuse, and it represents not just breaking free from someone else's control, but building a life on your own terms. Freedom in this sense does not mean only physical separation from the abuser, but the deep psychological and emotional liberation that allows you to see yourself clearly again, to make choices aligned with your values, and to stop living under the shadow of someone else's manipulation. Narcissistic abuse conditions you to doubt your worth and to believe that your identity exists only in relation to the other person's approval or disapproval. To reclaim freedom, you must dismantle those false narratives and replace them with a solid foundation of self-respect and self-love. The process of reclaiming freedom begins with redefining what freedom means to you personally. For many survivors, freedom is not only about no longer walking on eggshells or being silenced by fear, but also about having the space to express themselves without judgment. It might mean choosing how to spend your time, who to let into your life, and what dreams to pursue without constantly second-guessing whether it will provoke criticism or abandonment. When you start to see freedom as the ability to live authentically rather than reactively, you begin shifting the focus from the abuser's past power over you to your present power to create a meaningful life. Creating a future rooted in self-worth requires rebuilding the relationship you have with yourself. Narcissistic abuse often leaves deep wounds in how you view your own value. You may have been told repeatedly that you were not enough, too much, too difficult, or too weak. Over time, those messages may have become internalized, making you feel unworthy of love or respect. Reversing this conditioning involves consciously replacing those false beliefs with truths about your resilience, strength, and humanity. Each act of self-respect, whether setting a boundary, saying no to something that drains you, or celebrating your progress, reinforces the reality that your worth is not defined by anyone else. A key part of reclaiming freedom is giving yourself permission to dream again. Abuse often narrows your world, making everything revolve around survival and managing someone else's moods. When you are no longer trapped in that cycle, you may feel lost at first, unsure of what you truly want or who you are outside of the relationship. This is a natural part of the healing process. Rediscovering your desires, whether they are small daily joys or larger life goals, opens the door to building a future that reflects your authentic self. It could be as simple as taking up a hobby you once abandoned, exploring new places, or investing in your personal or professional growth. Each step in this direction reclaims a piece of your life that was stolen and adds color back to a life that abuse had drained. Reclaiming freedom also involves learning to trust your own voice again. Narcissistic abuse thrives on silencing and invalidating your perspective. You may have been told that your feelings were wrong, that your memories were false, or that your needs were selfish. This constant gaslighting erodes your trust in your own perceptions. To move forward, you must rebuild that trust by honoring your instincts and validating your emotions. When you feel uneasy in a situation, listen to that signal instead of dismissing it. When you achieve something, acknowledge it instead of minimizing it. Trusting yourself is the foundation of autonomy, and autonomy is the essence of freedom. Creating a future rooted in self-worth also requires building environments that affirm and reflect your value. This means choosing relationships that are reciprocal, where your needs matter as much as the other person's. It means surrounding yourself with people who encourage your growth instead of exploiting your vulnerabilities. It also involves cultivating practices and routines that nourish your body, mind, and spirit. Whether through meditation, journaling, therapy, or creative expression, these practices remind you daily that you are worthy of care and attention. The more consistently you treat yourself as someone valuable, the more natural it becomes to demand that others treat you with the same respect. An important element of reclaiming freedom is breaking the cycle of fear. Narcissistic abuse conditions you to live in anticipation of punishment, criticism, or abandonment. Even after leaving, that fear may linger, making you hesitant to take risks or assert yourself. Reclaiming freedom means recognizing when fear is holding you back and gently but firmly choosing to act anyway. It may mean speaking up even when your voice shakes, setting a boundary even when you fear rejection, or pursuing an opportunity even when you doubt yourself. Each time you push past fear, you strengthen the belief that you are capable of creating a life outside the confines of abuse. Rebuilding self-worth also involves integrating the lessons from your past without being defined by them. Survivors often feel ashamed of what they endured, questioning why they stayed or why they allowed the abuse to happen. But reframing those experiences as evidence of your endurance and your ability to survive reframes the narrative. Instead of seeing yourself as broken, you begin to see yourself as someone who overcame profound challenges and emerged stronger. Self-worth grows when you stop viewing yourself through the lens of shame and start seeing yourself through the lens of resilience. Another aspect of reclaiming freedom is reclaiming your time and energy. Abuse often consumes your life, leaving little space for yourself. When you are free, you have the opportunity to redirect that energy into pursuits that align with your values and passions. This might involve career goals, personal development, creative projects, or nurturing meaningful relationships. Every moment you spend on something that enriches you is a moment taken back from the grip of abuse. This conscious redirection of energy reinforces your autonomy and deepens your sense of self-worth. Finally, reclaiming freedom and creating a future rooted in self-worth is about embodying a new way of being where your choices reflect self-respect rather than survival. It is about learning to live in alignment with your values, to trust your voice, and to create joy that is not dependent on anyone else's approval. The journey may be gradual and at times challenging, but each step toward freedom reinforces that you are no longer defined by the past. You are no longer bound by the lies told to you, the fear instilled in you, or the control once exerted over you. You are free to define your worth and to shape your future in a way that honors who you truly are.